Hello and welcome to today's Pedestrian Focus webinar, sponsored by the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Safety and the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center. Today's webinar is entitled Raised Median Islands and Pedestrian Safety, and we'll be speaking with four presenters today. Charlie Zegeer of the UNC Highway Safety Research Center and the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center, Sheila Lyons of the Oregon Department of Transportation, Gary Sokolow of the Florida Department of Transportation, and Jack Ecklund of the City of University Place, Washington. My name is Dan Jolene, and I'm the Program Manager at the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Attendees, if you can hear me and you can hear each of our speakers, click the hand in the box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen to raise your hand so that we can be sure that you can hear us. And we'll give everyone just a minute to raise their hands, and hopefully we'll see those going up. And we do. Very good. All right, glad you can hear us and glad you all are able to join us today. Before we get started with today's webinar, I just want to go over a few administrative details about the functionality of the webinar software. If for some reason your computer or web browser freezes during the webinar today, please reload the website and log back into the program. You should be able to rejoin the session. Please note that attendees will not be able to speak during the webinar. We do expect a large number of attendees on this call, so by muting your audio, it helps us to cut down on confusion and background noise. As an attendee, you do have a control box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen that collapses and expands by clicking the double arrows. And though you won't be able to speak, you will have the ability to ask questions by entering them in the question box. If you have a problem during the webinar, you may enter it here. I'll be monitoring these questions and respond to you if I'm able. Questions pertaining to the presentation may be asked at any time in the question box, but will not be addressed until the end of the program, when we have built in about 25 minutes for a discussion period. Please feel free to ask those questions as we go along, and we'll get to them after the presentation. Also, when you exit the webinar today, there will be a very brief survey that will pop up, and we'd very much appreciate your feedback on our performance. Following today's webinar, you will receive a follow-up email. This email will be sent 1 to 2 days after the presentation, and will include a link to download a printable certificate of attendance for 1.5 hours of instruction. If there are multiple attendees at your site, please forward this link to the other participants so that they can download and print the certificate with their name. Slides will be made available once the presentation has been completed. The email you receive tomorrow will include a link to download a PDF copy of the presentation slides. This webinar has been approved for 1.5 CM credits by the AICP. The Road Safety Academy, which is the training and education arm of the UNC Highway Safety Research Center, is a registered provider of CM credits. For more information on the Road Safety Academy, please visit www.rsa.unc.edu. For more information on future webinars, or to view the archives from this webinar series and others, please visit www.walkinginfo.org/webinars. In addition to these webinars, PBIC offers 4 different in-person training courses to provide technical assistance to professionals and community members in developing pedestrian safety action plans and improving conditions for walking. These courses can be found at www.walkinginfo.org/training. Now, while Charlie is getting set up with his slide presentation, I just want to take a quick poll of the audience. Please let us know how many participants are viewing the webinar at your site. Okay, great. Give about another few seconds to cast your vote, and then we'll be moving on with the presentations. Okay, thank you all very much for your feedback. And now I'd like to welcome and thank all of our panelists for their presentations today, and we'll be taking questions at the end. Charlie, please take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Well, welcome everyone, and what we'd like to do today is to talk a little bit about pedestrian safety as it relates to medians and median islands. So what I'm going to do first to kick it off is to talk a little bit about an overview of medians and some of the what's known about their effectiveness on safety and crashes. Okay, so if you think about pedestrian safety in light of what are some of the things that can be used to help get pedestrian safety across the street, there are a number of roadway engineering type measures, some geometric, some sign signals, markings. And so here's an example of a few: crosswalks, overhead illumination, sign striping, traffic signals, overpasses, underpasses. Raised median islands represents one that has been proven to benefit pedestrian and overall roadway safety. So we're going to be covering that in the webinar today. When we talk about pedestrians crossing streets, one of the things that we know from the research is that pedestrian crashes are directly related to higher volumes of motor vehicle traffic and numbers of travel lanes. So the higher volume wide streets are the ones where we often find overrepresentation of pedestrian crashes, deaths, and injuries. So these are the kinds of roadways that lend themselves to really needing some effective solutions and treatments to improve safety. So the definition of medians and median islands, essentially we're talking about a median as being an area in the middle of the roadway separating opposing lanes of traffic, excluding the turn lanes, and they can generally be either pavement marking only or what we call raised medians or islands that have curbing, and they do separate the movement of motor vehicle traffic. Refuge islands are generally shorter sections of medians. They are referred to as center islands, refuge islands, pedestrian islands, median slow points. They have a variety of names. But generally, here we refer to raised islands that are placed in the middle of the street, so pedestrians have a place of refuge between opposing directions of motor vehicles. So when you look at a complex crossing for a pedestrian, you have a multi-lane roadway. Here you have 4 lanes of traffic, 2 in each direction. Providing a median in the middle of the street sort of breaks up that crossing maneuver into 2 distinct crossings. So a pedestrian in this case would be able to negotiate each direction of traffic at a single time. So you can see here a pedestrian stopping at the curb would look to the left, wait for a gap in traffic or wait for traffic to yield. Pedestrian would then cross to the first half of the street and then wait in the middle or in the median, in this case a raised median, to wait until it's safe to cross the second half of the street, and then the pedestrian completes the crossing. So when you have a section of roadway, a high volume multi-lane roadway where pedestrians are being struck or there's high risks, placing a raised median along that section really allows pedestrians to kind of figure out how to cross in a safer manner compared to only having a wide open roadway with no raised median. There's several items of guidance that we have from the Federal Highway Administration on medians and median islands. And one of them says that medians should be considered on curved sections of roadway, on multi-lane roads in urban and suburban areas, and they're particularly beneficial on roads with traffic volumes, average daily traffic, of about 12,000 vehicles a day or more, and or where the vehicle speeds are fairly high. Now, in terms of guidance for the width of raised medians, an absolute minimum of 4 feet, although FHWA guidance and also the AASHTO pedestrian guide recommends wider medians. 8 feet is preferred or wider. 6 feet is certainly better than 4, but we want to have enough room for several pedestrians to be waiting in the median or people in wheelchairs to have room so they're not sticking out, in the travel lane. And the medians also need to conform to ADA requirements. Okay, so if we look at a roadway like this, in this case a 5-lane roadway, and pedestrians are trying to cross, and here several pedestrians are waiting in the middle of the street, this really does not provide them a very good place of refuge. That does not provide a protective area for pedestrians. So providing a raised median, like hopefully you can see now, is a much better alternative for them. And now this situation has added a marked crosswalk and an angled crossing. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. And here you can see an illustration of that where they actually have a curb extension on each side of the street connecting a marked crosswalk, and then sort of an angled turn for the pedestrian in the middle of the street, and then they can complete their crossing. There's overhead lighting on this crossing as well. Now, some agencies have started putting in kind of a stagger to the right, where they have a marked crosswalk and then a raised median with a little stagger to the right to allow pedestrians or encourage them to be looking for oncoming traffic from to their right when they're in the middle of the street to help reduce the chance of them stepping out into the path of an oncoming vehicle coming from the second half of the street. So just to summarize very quickly, why do medians reduce pedestrian crashes? Because they break up a complex crossing on a multi-lane roadway into two simpler crossing steps. What's the crash reduction factor for adding raised medians? And from the research that's been done on this issue, we have, most of you know what crash reduction factors are. That's basically the percentage of expected reduction in pedestrian crashes. So at a marked crosswalk, the CRF is about 46%. At an unmarked crosswalk, the CRF is about 39%. Now there's something else we put up there called the CMF. That's the crash modification factor, and that's the terminology more recently used, like in the Highway Safety Manual. So what that would mean is, if you're at a marked crosswalk, if you're having pedestrian crashes along the route and you add a raised median or median island, you might expect to reduce about 46% of the crashes, and then the inverse of that is CMF of 0.54. So it's just sort of a different way of expressing the same information. Okay, so here's an example of the use of a raised median. This is along a suburban roadway in Bellevue, Washington, and it's at a bus stop location. This is a site where they have incorporated a raised median with a traffic signal, with pedestrian signals, and a marked crosswalk. So what would happen in this situation is a pedestrian would push the button, and it would give traffic a red light coming from the pedestrian's left. The pedestrian would proceed to cross the median while traffic is stopped to their left, and meanwhile traffic from the right continues to move forward. The pedestrian would then be walking to the right to get to a push button in the median, and then traffic would be released in the first direction. You can see the green light there for motorists. And meanwhile, traffic coming from the second direction continues to flow until the pedestrian pushes the button right there at the end of their little walk area. And then traffic would stop coming from the pedestrian's right, and pedestrians can cross safely to the other side. So it really breaks up the crossing into two steps. So it really minimizes delay to motorists as well as minimizes pedestrian delay, and provides an area of refuge so pedestrians can make the maneuver, and they have the benefit here of the traffic signal and pedestrian signals as well. Again, you can see then traffic resumes in both directions. Okay, so one of the details here that's important is that it does require a pedestrian push button at the end of the island, so pedestrians can activate the red light for motorists coming to their right. And you can see it also requires fencing, so that it has an area for pedestrians to queue up in the median, and also provides for them to walk to the right so they can see oncoming traffic and then get to where the push button is so they can stop traffic in the second direction. I'm going to just give you an example of one situation in Phoenix, Arizona. This was on West Van Buren Street. And it was a long corridor with traffic signals spaced about a half mile apart. Pedestrians were being struck crossing the street here. It's a 6-lane roadway, high volume, high speed. There was a marked crosswalk at an unsignalized location, and we're going to show you what that looks like. You can see it's just no frills, just paint on the road, kind of a ladder-style crosswalk. It's at an intersection, and pedestrians were having difficulty crossing the street, as you might imagine. So what they did is, in fact, you can look at this illustration of what the pedestrian would see crossing over to a community center, crossing 6 lanes of traffic. So the engineers here decided to implement a combination of treatments. And here you can see it. So there's a combination of a raised median island with high visibility marked crosswalks. And you can see the stagger that was built into the median itself with the fencing, just like we showed you in the other illustration. So this is sort of the after condition that they built to help pedestrians get safer, more safely across the street. Okay, now just to summarize some of the things that we know about median islands from the research and other guidelines is they can result in pedestrian crashes being reduced by 35 to 45% roughly. They tend to decrease pedestrian delay by up to 30%, but they can increase motorist delay in situations where you have an extended median and motorists have to make additional turns to get into the side streets or driveways. So I'm not going to get too much into that, but there is somewhat of a balance. We want to, again, focus on overall safety. And I will say that in addition to reducing pedestrian crashes, some studies have also showed that having a divided roadway, like with raised median islands, result in overall reduction in total vehicle crashes compared to undivided roadways. So we know that raised medians in particular can benefit safety for essentially all road users, motorists as well as pedestrians. And we know that raised medians can enhance visibility of pedestrians because they have a place to stand in the street and they can more easily see motorists coming in the second direction. Motorists can more easily see them. They can reduce vehicle speeds on certain routes and do provide access management. We're not going to get into in this presentation, but also in terms of reducing crashes involving driveways. The raised medians can help there. And they also provide space for signing that's appropriate for the roadway itself. Okay, so that's all I have, and turn it back to you, Dan. Okay.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Charlie, for that presentation. We're going to send things right over to Sheila Lyons of the Oregon Department of Transportation to continue the presentation. So Sheila, whenever you're ready, please take control of the screen, and we're ready for your presentation.
Thank you. Let's see. Do you see my slides?
Yep, everything looks great. Yep.
Great. Good morning. This is Sheila Lyons. I'm with the Oregon Department of Transportation. I manage the Pedestrian and Bicycle Program, and we have taken Dr. Zegeer's research and run with it, and to great effect. And I'm going to talk about mainly two types of pedestrian islands that we use: pedestrian crossing islands and pork chop islands. And I'm going to start with pedestrian crossing islands. This is the study that started the whole, I think, kind of started looking at how do pedestrians cross the street. It was published in 2005, and it's been a really great resource on basically what are the effects of marking a crosswalk, and when should you consider other measures that you need to do, and or maybe not marking the crosswalk at all. And a little bit of this is a repeat because, of course, Dr. Zegeer is the one that did the research and he just gave the prior presentation. But the correlate between crashes and is the motor vehicle traffic volume represented by the average daily traffic, which is what ADT means, and the number of travel lanes. And this has been confirmed by the observations we've made in Oregon on our state highways. So the guidance is that a marked crosswalk should not be used above a 40-mile-per-hour speed limit without a median on a multi-lane roadway with ADTs above 12,000 ADT, on multi-lane roadways with ADTs above 15,000, regardless of the other amenities that you have. And then, of course, you don't want to put them in close proximity to a signalized intersection, because you would want to direct the pedestrian to the signalized intersection. The following treatments are recommended: median islands on multi-lane roads. Of course, if you have ped volumes that warrant a traffic signal or another type of pedestrian hybrid beacon or rectangular rapid flashing beacon. Crossing median islands reduce the crossing exposure Curb extensions are another method to reduce the crossing width. And then, of course, you can also look at your roadway design. Often streets were just striped out for however many travel lanes fit in the physical space without much consideration for other modes of traffic, and there's a lot of opportunity to restripe for fewer numbers of travel lanes. We like to locate them, the crossings, with bus stops, and preferably on the far side of an uncontrolled intersection. And then there are other types of traffic calming measures like raised crosswalks, street narrowing, diverters, and illumination. And this is all the recommendations out of Dr. Zegeer's 2005 report. So the message here is that medians are the message, and that they reduce crash risk significantly, particularly on higher volume roadways, higher ADT roadways, and of course it needs to be a raised median. So we use the 2005 Zegeer report in conjunction with this report, which I like to refer to as NCHRP 562, which basically looked at what kind of stopping compliance do you get at different types of crossing amenities. And they studied everything from, just the median alone to various flashing signal treatments. And this report is a little bit technical. It's not been really translated into English so much. You have to read between the lines, but you can kind of ferret out whether you need a red signal indication or a yellow signal indication. So we've taken all this research and we've adopted it into our traffic manual. And this is the guidance from the Oregon Traffic Manual. You'll see that we basically have some common sense approaches plus the Zegeer research, which that if you want a marked crosswalk at an uncontrolled location, you have to have posted speeds less than 40 miles per hour. We've ratcheted down the research a little bit to 10,000 ADT. And if it's above 10,000 ADT, then we require a median because that is the safety feature. And we found that there's a lot of benefits to that. So we also have adopted a very similar approach to mid-block locations. And contrary to, I think, popular belief that crossing mid-block is problematic, we've found that it actually can be an easier crossing maneuver for pedestrians. And sometimes you can get a better crossing if you look at a mid-block location. In Oregon, we do not have a jaywalking law, so it is legal to cross mid-block. If it's a marked crosswalk, then the motor vehicle driver yields to the pedestrian. If it's an unmarked crosswalk, unmarked crossing, or an unmarked, it's not a crosswalk, then the pedestrian must yield to motor vehicle traffic, but there is no restriction on where the pedestrian can cross. And we've been having some good success with mid-block locations. So when you do a good enhanced pedestrian crossing, it is an opportunity to concentrate, take a diffuse number, a corridor where you have a diffuse pedestrian generators, you can't tell where the pedestrian is going to cross. You provide a good pedestrian crossing and pedestrians will be attracted to it, and you'll get the vast majority of your crossings happening at that location. And then you have to look at other things like free turn movements on and off the roadway and other traffic characteristics that might make crossing problematic for pedestrians. And then I have some kind of photo examples of some of the median islands that we've installed on roadways. Now, this picture behind the photographer here is a grocery store. This is an excellent location for a median island crossing, and this is a mid-block crossing. There is a signal just a few hundred feet down the road from this, but that would represent quite a bit of out-of-direction travel for pedestrians, and so they opted for the median island, and it's quite successful. This is on a state highway near the Oregon coast. This is I would say this is a 6-lane facility because it's got 2 bike lanes, but it's 4 motor vehicle travel lanes and a center. If you have an unmarked 2-way center turn lane, there's lots of available real estate for median islands. And we always see that as opportunity to place a median when you have a 2-way center turn lane. There's lots of available room out there. This is on Highway 101 along the Oregon coast. Again, it doesn't have to be very elaborate or complex. A very simple median island, again, taking an opportunity of the two-way turn lane median. This is a project that happened on a local street in Eugene. 4 motor vehicle travel lanes, 2 bike lanes, plus a median island. On the right of the photo, there's a community center and school, and then on the left of the photo, of course, is a convenience store. Classic configuration. Children on one side, the snacks and treats on the other side. And this type of roadway is very, very difficult to cross for children. And you'll notice the before condition has a marked crosswalk and an overhead beacon, an amber beacon. And still there was a fatality at this location. So they did a restriping of the roadway. It took up a lot of space in the center of the roadway to add a very elaborate median island that includes some channelization for the motor vehicle left. And this is also, you probably can't see it from this photo, but it is one of those zigzag crossings with fencing that kind of forces the pedestrian to make the zigzag. And the flashing treatment was altered to be a rectangular rapid flashing beacon in this location. And then we also have examples on just rural 2-lane roadways. This was 2 lanes with a 2-way center turn lane, and we used that opportunity there to put in a median island. Again, this one has flasher treatments, but really it's the median that is the safety feature. So that is the condition. Often the public wants the flashing beacon because that helps them, assist them to get them across the street. But the selling feature for the median is you have to have the median in order to get the flasher. That's often the condition because the median is the safety feature. The flashing beacon is the crossing assist feature, but the median is the life-saving feature. And then another example with the right, it's angled to the right to kind of force pedestrians to look to the right before completing the crossing. We got started with median islands and flashing amber treatments on this Highway 99W in Corvallis, Oregon, which is where I happen to live, and so I've observed this facility since it went in. We did, there were 7 median islands that went in along a 2-mile corridor. They were paired with with transit stops, and no left turns were harmed in the provision of these medians. This is a diffuse pedestrian generator. There's shopping and housing and destinations all along this corridor. The pedestrian crossings were very diffuse, and you couldn't really tell where exactly is a good place to put the median. So this community zeroed in on paired them with the transit stops, which is a really great approach to deciding where to put the median. Put it with the transit stops, which is going to generate a certain number of pedestrian crossings. And then you can adjust the location of the median kind of a few feet up or down in order to get it placed so that you don't have any turn restrictions. There were no left turns eliminated in the placement of the medians, these 7 medians along this 2-mile corridor. Because if you can adjust it, 50, 60 feet this way or 50, 60 feet that way, you can resolve those conflicts pretty easily and still find that pedestrians will be attracted to these crossings. And these are accompanied with an early version of a pedestrian-activated amber flashing treatment, not the rapid rectangular flashing, but just an amber flasher. These were installed in about 2005. They are all mid-block, and they all have median islands, and 4 of them have the pole-mounted flashing beacons. And this is just my personal observation, plus some informal analysis that we did by placing a camera out and watching one of these crossings. I believe traffic has slowed in the 3 to 5 mile an hour range. Pedestrian crossings have been concentrated at the medians, and we've observed up to 85 crossings at one location with over 200 pedestrians walked past the camera, so there's an enormous amount of pedestrian activity on this street. Stopping compliance has improved enormously. It's probably gone from the 30–40% range up into the 80% range. Rear enders did spike after the installations, as would be expected, although I believe that's tapered down over time as residents of this area have gotten used to what these crossings mean, what it means when the flashers go off, just being more experienced with these facilities. I've observed 10-year-olds helping 6-year-olds cross at these locations. That's possible mainly because of a flashing amber, pedestrian activated amber, but the median island also greatly simplifies the crossing for young children. And there's an overall improvement in the pedestrian environment. I think there's been an increase in the number of pedestrians, and I've observed and overheard conversations on the bus about people talking about the median islands and the benefit it provides them in their transit. People who couldn't cross the street used to have to get on the bus to cross the street and take the bus on its full route in order to get across the street. And now they can just cross the street at one of these median island treatments. We also use pork chop islands. We use them mainly when a right turn pocket is present. Wherever there's real estate available, we use cut-throughs for wheelchairs. And it turns out that we have a lot of support from the signal folks because it's good real estate for them to place their signal poles, and it makes for shorter mast arms and better signal pole placement. Again, it separates the conflicts, it reduces the crossing distance, it improves the signal timing, and does reduce crashes at Pork Chop Island. And you can imagine, what some of the signal timing would have to be like without that. How long would these pedestrian crossings be? How long would the pedestrian phase be? There would be quite a bit of delay for the motor vehicle traffic as well. Design is important. You want to create as much of a 90-degree angle as you can, or get as close to that. You can't get a 90-degree angle, but you want to have a less acute angle so that you line up the motor vehicle driver to not have to turn all the way around behind them to merge into traffic. It also improves their visibility of the pedestrian crossing. We like to make them 2 times the width. The length should be 2 times the width, and we use cut-through We use cut-through for wheelchair access. And then if you just, on a snowy day, go out and look, you can see that these pork chop islands just present themselves. And notice that the design is exactly as I've described. It's about 2 times long. The length is 2 times the width. It's kind of a natural bit of real estate that's available for a median island. You don't get a lot of pushback from the roadway designers for them. So then the question becomes, should you mark the crosswalk? If you place a pork chop island, that's an opportunity to not signalize the right turn movement. You can have a right turn lane without signalization. And it's not a burden on pedestrians to cross that because the sight lines are good, motor vehicles can see the pedestrian, and the question is, should you mark it? The MUTCD does advise marking it. So in Oregon, we tend to interpret this as an opportunity to mark it, and we tend to mark it. And then here's some examples. This is in Bend, Oregon, and it's an opportunity, you can put landscaping. They chose rocks here. Notice we have a cut-through. We have a PED push button available on the island. The crossing of the right turn lane is not signalized, but once you get to the pork chop, you have to activate the pedestrian walk phase. And then wheelchair access is facilitated with cut-throughs. This is an installation, a pork chop island, that was used to address a dual right turn with a bike lane. And the pork chop island allowed the bike lane to move to between the 2 right turn lanes, and it works. This is a very low speed environment, under 20 miles an hour, and it is a dual right, but the right, the inside right, not the curb right, but the next lane over, in order to negotiate this turn, because of this pork chop island, you have to slow down quite a bit, and so it facilitates the installation of the bike lane in this location. And then again, it just provides crossing assistance to people of all stripes. And this is the end of my presentation, and that's the world's tallest man on a bicycle. And I'll turn it over.
All right, thank you very much, Sheila, for your presentation. We are now going to turn it over to Gary Sokolow to talk about Florida Department of Transportation median policy. So Gary, whenever you're ready, please go ahead and take control of the screen.
All right, thank you. Let me get that up on the screen. And hey, I'm Gary Sokolow. I work for Florida DOT. I am the access management person here in the central office. We have access management experts throughout our state. And I was asked to speak today about our restrictive median policy, which we have had in place since the early 1990s. And, found out that it was fairly special when I started talking to people from other states. So in 1993, our design section created a policy that essentially said any multi-lane, and those are new multi-lane projects with a design speed of 40 miles per hour, over 40 miles per hour, will be designed to have a restrictive median. And just as importantly, in my opinion, the second part of the policy was that it would encourage the use of small restrictive medians like the kinds that you've seen already from the first two presentations, even where we do have, let's say, a five-lane design type thing. So that is what was been in place since 1993. It has now been moved into our standard plans preparation manual. At the end of the presentation, almost everything that I mentioned will have a hot link to it, and so there you see what the median policy is. And as I mentioned, that small islands, even, and this was pointed out in our last presentation, can be very helpful. This is Sark Street in Tallahassee, pretty close to where I live. It was a 5-lane section, and through the help of the principals of the two schools nearby, they were able to have these pedestrian islands put in really during the construction phase. This was already under construction when these were added. So what led to our policy? A number of studies and a number of past work has shown that wherever restrictive medians have been put in, that the crash rate goes down. And what I'm going to be speaking of generally will be automobile vehicle crash rates. Back in 1993, the University of Florida did this study comparing urban multi-lane highways. So we would compare the same kinds of highways only during the day, and found a significant decrease in the crash rate between the center turn lane versus those with the raised median. Another study that was done in the early 1990s, not by Florida DOT, also showed that there is a gigantic benefit for the pedestrian within urbanized areas in places as far away from each other as Atlanta and Los Angeles. So this is, as we've already seen, it's pretty universal. Here in Tallahassee, also probably back in the year 2002, the city traffic engineer, Debbie Danton, really had a great effort to try and put restrictive median in on Appalachian Parkway. And she used a series of photos taken from a light pole show the city council people some of the issues here. And you can see this is pretty scary. And the thing that I think we talked about earlier is how the median is the safety feature. And one of the reasons it is the safety feature is just not because it's big, and not just because it's off the ground, but because of its size. It is visible to the driver, whereas a pedestrian is invisible to, let's just say, 10% of these people, and enough that this is a place where there were a number of pedestrian crashes that could be that people on our commission in the city could say, well, yeah, I know what it's like over there, and it really helped. So you see the series of photos really helped convince our leaders to put a median in. And there's what it looks like today. That was back in 2002. And now this is what it looks like today. So what was interesting to me is that our Secretary of Transportation has come to our section frequently to say, look, I get a lot of complaints from businesses when we put in medians. And I try to explain that this is for safety purposes. And just a matter of fact, Florida DOT, our Secretary's office, from his office, you can see Appalachian Parkway. He knew that we were working on a study of these kinds of roadways and asked if we could speed up the portion on Appalachian Parkway so he could have the data in his office, where he sometimes gets these complaints from some of the business interests. So we've been working with the Florida International University in South Florida to see the difference in our multi-lane highways where we actually put a median in, before and after studies all over the state. So the first thing we did was Appalachian Parkway, and this is what we found. This is 1983 to 2010. You see a big drop in 1991. We found out that had something to do more with the crash reporting standards, which became less stringent, or actually more stringent. In other words, it had to be property damage over a certain amount or bodily injury. This is the period of construction, 2002 to 2004, and you can see the drop that has happened, and it is because of the median, because certain other crashes, wet crashes and nighttime crashes, had been removed, so we could try to get a better indication of what caused the decrease in the crash rate. Again, speaking about vehicle crashes. Okay, this is just a blow-up of that. Now, knowing how significant, and those of you that have started working with the Highway Safety Manual understand that medians are one of the most effective ways to increase safety. And so how come we're not building more of them? Well, controversies with existing businesses is a big issue and something that has to be dealt with. And there seems to be a real resistance to U-turns. Okay? You cannot, just because you have the right to put a median down a roadway, and just because it's the right thing to do, just act like it. You really need to be very sensitive, and you really need to do your work in order to become successful. So what we've done in the past few years is we've really worked on our materials that we have on public relations, and we've really also worked significantly on the issues of things like U-turns. And I'll get more into that later. So in addition to some of the materials that we have for the public, we've also created materials for our own professionals. Traffic engineers, transportation professionals usually become specialists at something, and many times thrust into defending decisions that were made by specialists of another field. So what we did is we tried to put out documents and training that help the non-specialist professional be able to understand the principles behind good access management, good median design. And that's why we have created the median handbook and the driveway information guide. This is just one of the pages of one of the pamphlets that we put together. It's a question and answer. We did it specifically from the standpoint of the businesses, and we know what kind of questions they ask because we've had a lot of experience. We have never, in our years of working, we understand what it's like to go against a hostile audience. And they have a lot of fears. Most people fear when things change, especially if they've put their lives into their businesses, and we understand that. So we thought to ourselves, we need some emotional arguments also. And at the end of many of our presentations, where we're hearing, that we're going to hurt business, we just want to ask people to be honest with themselves. Which area do you think is more conducive to a healthy business? Is it in a place like this with no access management, or is it a place like this, like US 192? This is near the entrance of Disney, and you should have seen what it looked like before. And from the state of business, this is a much better location to have a business. As I said before, U-turns are just a subject that comes up every time. And we talked about it earlier, I believe, in the first presentation, where Charlie mentioned that some of the increased travel time can be traced back to these U-turns, and we've actually found that it's not so. Yeah, it increases the travel times for those people who would desire to turn left, but the effectiveness and the safety of the bulk of the people either crossing the street or going on foot or going straight through, it really doesn't cause much of a problem. So we had the University of South Florida in Tampa do a study that had never been done before. We wanted to know what the differences were between the movement of the direct left versus when the driver needs to make a right-hand turn followed by a U-turn to get to the same place. And the only way to do that was by the use of video cameras placed through the entire area, and then to evaluate the data for conflicts and evasive maneuvers. So instead of waiting for crashes to happen and having to look at the crashes, in the reports, what we did is on 8 corridors, we had over 300 hours of video. And we measured the evasive maneuvers. Again, this is just vehicular. This is not pedestrian. And these are some of the conflicts that were studied. So, I mean, there are conflicts with U-turns. I mean, we're not, we're not just saying that they don't happen. This is a U-turn, right turn conflict, and you know that when you make a U-turn, there's sometimes a conflict with people turning right at that intersection. Okay, but the thing to remember most of all is that the left turn out is the most dangerous of the low-speed arterial driving maneuvers you can make. And this is what we're trying to control for as much as possible. And when you do this, and you provide medians and provide well-designed directional median openings, you also improve the environment dramatically for pedestrians. So the left turnout has the problem of exposing that left turnout driver to the most dangerous crash, and that is the right angle collision. And you can see right here, the through vehicle is directly hitting a person in a car. And that is why the right angle collision, especially of people turning out left because of their lack of visibility or the fact that somebody's behind them and making them go for a gap that they shouldn't go for, you put that all together, this is the highest potential for physical injury of a person in a vehicle, let alone a person crossing the roadway. So we know that the pedestrian is the most vulnerable and that we need to consider them heavily in the design of these medians. Now, the work that was done by the University of South Florida showed, when they looked at the evasive maneuvers, that even though the right turn followed by the U-turn traveled a greater distance, that the conflicts per thousand involved vehicles went down dramatically. So let's just think about that. Greater travel time, greater travel distance, actually more maneuvers. Think about it. You're merging, you're making a U-turn, you're re-merging, and even then, the number of evasive maneuvers was decreased by those longer traveling vehicles than those people choosing to make a direct left turn. Okay, so some of the things that we've dealt with to try to have a success here is to create handbooks, like we said, to create training, and every district has an access management review committee to deal with controversies and as they come up, and there are plenty of them. This is the median handbook, which helps us determine where median openings go. And as you can see, safety, as put forth by everybody today, the median is the most important safety aspect of this access management design. Okay, we even have an entire chapter on U-turns because of the what a hard sell it can be sometimes, and these are just some locations where we've had to address the extra space needed for U-turns. I've said some of these things earlier. To concentrate on these medians is safety, and even though you have the authority, don't act like you have that authority. Do be sensitive to the businesses, work with them. They actually can be good allies if you work with them. And also, if you have not already done all this already, that you will find people in your own agencies that are already doing good work in the field of access management and medians. Now, As I've told you, we do come under a lot of pressure from some interests who are afraid of what the median is going to do. And as I was going through my files about a year ago, I came across an article that the Orlando Sentinel did back in 2004 that I had almost forgotten about. And this is on State Road 50 through the city of Orlando and the Orlando area. And the Orlando Sentinel did this article on the deadliest stretch of road, what they considered in the Orlando area, which was State Road 50. And they broke State Road 50 into different segments here, and they said the average death rate, in this per million vehicle miles, is 1.8. And yet there was a portion here on 50. All of these were high, but there was a portion here that actually had 8 deaths. And this, again, is pedestrian and vehicle. And I know you can't see all these, but this is just a scan from the first article. Each of these red spots that you see here is a death. And here's a list of the names. And that portion that had the 8 deaths per million vehicle miles was this section that's blown up here. So each of these numbers here represents a person who died in a traffic-related incident on this small portion of road between 2000 and 2004. Now, the thing that really hit me was, again, this is not all of the people you saw in that original article, but this is, starting at number 23. I want people to see that these are real people. And it has their names, their ages, and what they were doing that led to their death. And think about medians as you look at this. Tried to turn left, tried to turn left, tried to turn left. Walk across, walk across, walk across, walk across, walk across. The issue here isn't, would all of these people be alive today? Probably not. But the median definitely would have helped. The reason we put this together is to say we're not putting these medians out there as something to speed up traffic or even something that makes the road look pretty. That we're really trying to save the heartache of what you see here, and that each of these people had a life. And they were doing things on the roadway that most of us do when we put ourselves in danger. So just try to keep that in mind, especially when we have to fight hard to help get a median put in to help pedestrians as well as motorists. So here is my contact information, and I do have plenty of good materials that I can share with you, and I'll take your questions when we get to them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Gary, for your presentation. We're going to go ahead and turn it over to our final presentation, Jack Ecklund with the City of University Place, Washington. And Jack, whenever you're ready, please go ahead and begin your presentation. Hi, Jack. We can't seem to hear you. Can you turn your volume up, or you might have us on mute still?
All right, how's that? Sorry about that. Okay, I'll back up a little bit. Anyway, my name is Jack Ecklund. I'm the city engineer for University Place, Washington, and I'd like to share with you some of our experience and success in constructing raised landscape medians along our primary commercial arterial, which is Bridgeport Way. Now, we are a city of about 30,000 people located in western Washington, just to the southwest of Tacoma, and located right along Puget Sound. We're a relatively new city, having incorporated in 1995. Bridgeport Way is our primary commercial corridor and is also a regionally significant arterial that connects Interstate 5 to Highway 16, and running north-south, and it carries about an average daily traffic of about 25,000 vehicles per day. Now, prior to our project, Bridgeport Way was made up of a 5-lane, undivided lanes traffic, 2 in each direction with a center turn lane. We had no sidewalks, no bike lanes. We had only limited lighting. We had multiple driveway accesses on both sides, high vehicle speeds, and that combined to result in more than 300 crashes over a 4.5-year period. And then in addition to being unsafe, the road was pretty homely and did very little to encourage any kind of economic development in the heart of our city. Now, after incorporation, the City Council met with representatives from the community to identify a community vision. Now, that's shown there, but basically the essence of this vision, they wanted to create a sense of place and establish a city identity that embodied the community values. Now, what they realized also there, that to do that sense of place, they really needed to start with our streets, and that really meant transforming our primary street, Bridgeport Way. Now, to begin this process, we went to the community, the stakeholders. We had a number of design meetings. Here's a little timeline of some various things we did. But essentially, we had various workshops, design charrettes. Now, the result of the charrettes and design things and public input were to come up with, they had objectives for what they wanted to see on Bridgeport. Basically, they wanted to improve our safety for our motorists and pedestrians, bicyclists, improve our mobility, create welcoming places, choices for transportation, economic growth. The design elements they came up with, in this case, was the continuous landscape median, sidewalks on both sides, bike lanes, planter strips, street lighting, U-turn pockets at intersections, and then mid-block pedestrian crossings. When they came out with this project, or the proposal for it, there certainly were a lot of criticisms. The highest one would be that this would certainly kill business. Everyone said, you're going to clog up access. Nobody's going to get to my business. You're just wasting money. Nobody's going to walk or bike out here anyway. All you're doing is putting money into making it look nice. And also, there's a fair amount of people thought that it would just be overall unsafe. Now, here's the picture again of what it was before, and this is what essentially what it looks like after. Now, fortunately, our leaders did have the courage to stick to their guns and proceed. Now, one thing we did do is we split the project into half-mile phases in order to match both our funding availability, but also keep it within the scope of the construction manageable, and basically we targeted our busiest half-mile section first, to kind of take off the most difficult piece first and show what could happen. Now, after we completed this first phase, the critics essentially disappeared, and that really paved the way for us to extend these improvements down the corridor. Now, one of the things is to be expected was we had significant results in accident reduction. We had overall, it's a 20% reduction in accidents in the corridor and a 40% reduction in injuries in the corridor. The more telling, and we had a lot of serious mid-block accidents. The right turn or left turn kind of movements that were shown in some of the other presentations, we had had a 75% reduction in mid-block accidents overall, and then an 80% reduction in mid-block injuries. And one stat I don't really have on this, but of those mid-block injuries, we essentially eliminate any serious injuries, which is remarkable. Now, another thing, another finding was results. What was the result of this had on the local business? Because this was really our only commercial corridor in our city. And as I mentioned, the primary criticism of the project was it was going to kill business because, it'd make access too difficult. But what we found actually was the opposite. Based on sales tax revenue data, we found that after the completion of our first phase of project, we got over 7% increase in sales in this corridor. And then this sales continued to increase even during construction of our next phase of our project. So during construction, we still saw over 5% increase. And after the construction and completion of the second phase, we had an over 8% increase in sales in this area. Now compare that in the rest of the area during the same time of a background sales growth of about 1%. So people actually were coming here, and really it goes to the type of place you want to go and want to do business is a place that's safe and inviting and so forth. Now, some of the other features I mentioned, we had the pedestrian safety. We did have mid-block crossings. We do have we had some signalized pedestrian mid-block crosswalks. In addition, we have on some of our phases, we have some breaks in our medians at key locations for emergency providers. So we have some collapsible posts. What you see in this picture is a assisted living facility that our fire folks have to get in and out quite a bit. And so these collapsible posts allow them to get in and out, but still prevents the general public and minimizes those accidents. Another thing, I don't have a slide on here, but just to talk about on the U-turn flares that we had at the intersections. As has been mentioned in some of the previous presentations, there are you get some criticisms and concerns about U-turns, and then that conflict between right turners and U-turns. And we got even currently, after it's been running for quite a while, we still get people calling and complaining, and they say, "Oh my goodness, someone almost hit me out here, but I was going here." But the thing about the U-turn conflicts is that unlike the left turn conflicts where you have a slow speed versus a high speed, the right turn U-turn conflict are two low speed maneuvers. And so although there are sometimes a right turner may not be paying attention to U-turn, we first implement ours in '98. So in those, what would that be, 14 years, we have not had a single reportable accident of that conflict. So although there may have been people that aren't paying attention, by the time they get to that conflict zone, they figure it out because the speeds are so low. So it's not really particularly, at least in our experience, hasn't been a particularly accident-prone situation. So once again, this is kind of the transportation successes we've had. We had mid-block crashes reduced by 75%. We separated our pedestrians from our vehicle traffic. We got some new street lights up and down, made things safer. Our business access, basically we had sales volume increase, so that was good, and our mobility was increased overall with our side friction, the added bike lanes, U-turns, improved bus stops, and all that sort of thing. One thing then to say, as I mentioned, we started with the part of the road right in the middle of the city. By having success there, we were able to now add on to that in subsequent phases, and we've now added about 2 miles of this. And really, the initial criticism were all in that initial phase, and then as we move along these other phases, the opposition and criticisms have essentially vanished. Then just real briefly, the part of keys of our success were, you kind of have a vision for what you want for the corridor and then stick to that. Hopefully have the courage to implement, these type of changes with the medians. Another important thing is pay attention to details. Have the things with the aesthetics of a project go a long way at the end to community acceptance. And then above everything else, build it, get something on the street, because the the thing that will make critics silence critics the easiest is getting a successful project out in the street to show what it can do, and then it just really paves the way for some more. So that is just kind of our experience in a nutshell. So I'm happy to turn it over back to Dan, and we can field some questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Jack. I really appreciate your presentation and all the other presentations as well. We have a few minutes, about 20 minutes or so, to take some questions. And we did receive quite a few questions. Thank you all for submitting those. And we won't have time to get to all of them, unfortunately. If we don't get to your questions, our panelists have been kind enough to share their email addresses here on the screen. So if you'd like to contact them directly with your questions, please do so if your question doesn't get answered today. So the first question I'd like to ask, and I'll ask any of the panelists for any of these questions, please feel free to jump in and respond. The first thing that's been brought up is that many of these treatments seem to be associated with mid-block crossings, having mid-block crosswalks put in. So can you address some concerns, any concerns that some engineers may have about mid-block crosswalks and putting those in?
All right, Dan, I'll start. And this is Charlie. I would mention that when we did the study that Sheila made reference to for Federal Highway on the safety of marked versus unmarked crosswalks, one of the things we looked at was intersection versus mid-block, and which is safer. And what we found is the kinds of things that really do increase the risk for pedestrians are things like traffic volume, number of lanes, median islands, things like that. So what we found, when you account for all those kinds of factors, we found no significant difference in pedestrian crash risk, whether it's at an intersection or mid-block. And however, that doesn't mean that all mid-block crossings are as safe as we want them, or intersection crossings as safe as we want them. So there are other measures that we need to take into account before we make a decision on whether to, for example, mark a mid-block crosswalk. And I don't have time to go into a lot of detail. Many of the proposed changes are things like adding median islands. If it's a multi-lane high-volume road, especially with 3 or more lanes combined with 12,000 vehicles a day or more, then we look at some other alternatives, such as if we consider things like the HAWK signal, pedestrian hybrid beacon, or we look at things like the advanced yield lines with signing, in combination with things like raised median islands or overhead lighting. So there are a lot of things that also come into play when we make the decision on a pedestrian crossing, whether it's mid-block or intersection.
Okay, great. Thank you, Charlie. Anyone else like to respond to that question?
This is Sheila, and we tend to go for mid-block locations because that's where we can get the median. And it's harder to restrict left turns at an intersection. Okay.
All right, great. Thank you for that. I'll move on to the next question. A lot of questions came in actually about the when we were talking about pork chop islands and cut-throughs, specifically related to maintenance. And this is both with respect to sort of those in cold weather climates with street paving, or snow removal, and also some people asked about whether maintenance at cut-throughs could, maybe there's a buildup of road debris or anything else in those cut-throughs. Can you speak at all about the maintenance side of this?
This is Sheila again. Some of those cut-throughs that I showed were in the Cascade Range, in other words, a very snowy area of the state. It hasn't come up as an issue. We haven't heard a lot of grumbling. Debris can collect in the cut-throughs, but when you look at the other options for wheelchair access, cut-throughs rise to the top is the best alternate. If you do an actual ramp up to the median, and then if you incorporate the level landing and the ramp slope, etc., pretty soon you have a very large median island, and you can't really make it ADA accessible. So given the trade-offs, cut-throughs are the choice. And I haven't seen that they're, overly problematic. They don't become so debris strewn that you can't use them or anything like that.
Anything else from any of you all on the maintenance issues from your own local perspectives? Okay, well, if not, there's one other question that is somewhat related to what, Sheila, you were just mentioning. Can you all talk a little bit more about some of the ADA requirements for some of the continuous medians that we saw some images of, as far as putting in ramps and tactile strips and other sort of ADA compliance issues that you may run into when installing these treatments?
For Jack, one thing we found with ADA, we approach it a couple ways depending on a couple locations. You know, in some areas we just had the straight. You know, you have the. For us, it was fairly easy because we didn't have any existing infrastructure to have to adjust ramps. But you know, you have the standard ramps on some of our crossings. But we did do at a key location. We actually did a raised pedestrian crossing, so you have that uninterrupted flow. They don't actually have to ramp down, and also has a little bit of a traffic calming, or at least puts notice to the driver. So that's been a successful feature for us, a raised feature, and then you still have the tactile strips, you know, across the band, but it still is fairly appealing as well.
Okay, let me sort of cover just a variation of that question I think one person asked, and that is often we get the question, well, what happens if you have a multi-lane high-speed high-volume road? It's not signalized. And so you have an intersection with a curb ramp, you know, and possibly a median. Do you automatically have to put in a marked crosswalk? And my answer is no. And in fact, if you look at not only the results from our study, but also the MUTCD and the Traffic Control Devices Handbook that also gives some similar guidance to our research, it's not essential that you add a marked crosswalk simply because you have a curb ramp or simply because you have a curb ramp and a median with cut-throughs. So I know that that's a fairly controversial issue that some of you have, but I would ask you to be very cautious before you put in a marked crosswalk unless that it does have other amenities that you need to provide a reasonably safe crossing for pedestrians. And some of that we've talked about already in some of the presentations, and there's other guidance that is out there on when some of these other treatments are appropriate, like the hybrid pedestrian beacon and the advanced yield lines and certainly raised median islands, overhead lighting. There are a number of different amenities or treatments that need to be considered in some of these questions, possibly in conjunction with median islands. That's really important to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Gary, or Jack, I'm sorry. The next question has to do, again, with the pork chop islands. Specifically, when you have the right turn movement at a pork chop island, we had a lot of questions about whether it is appropriate to signalize that right turn movement where the pedestrian is crossing or not. And so I'd like to ask you all, maybe Sheila specifically, to address that issue of whether or not to signalize that right turn movement at the pork chop island crossing.
Well, I always think of signalization as, do you need to induce a gap for the pedestrian to make the cross the street? And usually at a right turn, the driver is pulling up to, the rest of the intersection is signalized. So they're pulling up. If you design your island properly so that it forces some slowing and that they have to slow down, then usually the opportunity for the pedestrian to make eye contact, or for the driver to see the pedestrian's waiting to cross the street, is enough to induce the stopping compliance that you're looking for. I think that the question I would ask about signalization is, do you need to improve stopping compliance of that right turn movement for pedestrians? In other words, do you need to induce a gap? And if not, then it's an opportunity not to have that as part of the signal phasing, and it can kind of simplify the signal phasing. So I would say that default is no, unless you have stopping compliance issues.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts from the rest of you on that issue, signalization of the pork chop island? Okay. Well, if not, one of the next questions that came up was in regards to landscaping on median islands, and it seems like a lot of these median islands, the continuous medians, as well as the refuge islands, when they're put in, they do receive an abundance of landscaping, tree plantings, shrubs and flowers and things of the sort. What sort of issues do you have to consider when thinking about sight distance, both the pedestrian sight distance as well as motor vehicle sight distance? What sort of standards or guidelines do you use to sort of drive what landscaping and other treatments you put on these median islands?
In Florida, this is Gary Sokolow, and in Florida we have special landscaping guides for medians that consider not only the distance, again, just for the driver here, that the driver can see, but also the uninterrupted view of traffic for a certain number of seconds. But the most important thing to remember, and it's just something simple that our landscape architect told me, is that if the further apart your median openings are, the more landscaping you can put out there, because you don't have to worry as much about the visibility at those openings. So if anyone is interested in the guidelines that Florida DOT put together, because we had to put together guidelines for both the very thin type trees and also for our state tree, the sable palm. And if you send me an email, I can send you a link to those engineering guides.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. And if you send me that link, I can actually post that where we'll be posting our presentation slides as well, so people can get to it there.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else like to talk about the sight distance issues or any guidelines for landscaping on the raised medians, refuge islands, or continuous medians? Okay, well, if not, we'll move on then to the next question. This one has to do with vehicle speeds, and just asking if you all, when you put in these medians, have you noticed any big impacts on overall vehicle speeds through these corridors? And as some agencies may think about using that as sort of another way to sort of narrow the roadway and then and lower vehicle speeds. Have you seen any of that evidence in your work?
This is Jack. We had on a couple of scenarios. So on Bridgeport itself, where it was more that, the 2 lanes in each direction, that higher speed. We did see some moderate speed reductions, but only about a couple miles, which for that, those volumes and speeds wasn't really significant, other than, we're providing the safe area. But one thing more telling is we've done it on a secondary arterial, which is the one, a travel lane in each direction, have the median throughout the area. It was a roadway that was chronic with speeding, and you camp a police officer there all day and you still would have the speeders. And what we found with that is we had almost a 5 to 7 mile an hour reduction in speeds, especially as that landscaping became more mature even. And it's transformed that corridor essentially into an area we don't even have to do enforcement on anymore. So especially in the areas where you can at least visually narrow the view, not obstruct, but narrow things down on the corridor, we've seen a lot of success in speed reductions.
Okay, great. Anyone else like to speak about speeds, vehicle speeds as they relate to medians? If not, we can move on then to talk about some other treatments that can go along with these raised medians. Specifically, how have your agencies looked at using both education and enforcement to sort of enhance the engineering treatments to improve pedestrian safety as well as motor vehicle safety? Sometimes, we find that it's helpful to combine these types of treatments together into a comprehensive sort of approach with education and enforcement as well. So can you speak about any any of those measures that you've used to further enhance safety?
This is Sheila. Oregon, the Transportation Safety Division offers police departments opportunities to fund pedestrian sting operations, but I'm not aware of a combined, put the median island or the crossing treatment in plus the pedestrian sting operation. Usually, stop and compliance goes up with the median and other treatments, and the need for enforcement goes down a little bit, actually.
Okay, this is Charlie, and we have dealt with agencies around the country that many of them have seen the need to have a combination of the education and enforcement to go along with the engineering, particularly where there's a new device, a device that may not be intuitive to drivers. Things like the rectangular rapid flash beacon or the pedestrian hybrid beacon, or things that may be fairly new to drivers. They may not be expecting it, or may need a little bit of education. But in a broader sense, there is evidence out there that the use of well-planned selective enforcement and or education is really important in overall pedestrian safety. The one experience we had in Miami-Dade County, working with the MPO down there and the police and the educators, there was a significant reduction in child pedestrian crashes after an education program. And then along corridors where they conducted enforcement, they experienced much fewer violations of motorists failing to yield to pedestrians, and also additional crash reductions in overall crashes. So that's part of an FHWA effort, along with a NHTSA effort that implemented all different types of engineering, education, enforcement countermeasures in South Florida a few years ago. So there's really an important place for education and enforcement in all this.
All right, thank you, Charlie. I think we have time for just one more question, unfortunately. This one has to do with some of the other uses that you could be using or putting on one of the raised medians or a continuous median, and that is, do any of you have the ability or have the use of the raised median for bus stops or light rail stations or any other transit uses? We've seen this in some areas, and we're just curious if any of your agencies are using the raised median area for those purposes.
The City of Eugene installed bus rapid transit along a couple of corridors, and they were able to use the median islands. And then if you do, they were large enough to serve as transit stops. So yeah, it's another great use of them.
All right. Well, it doesn't sound like anyone else has that, so maybe we'll await some more examples of that being done. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for discussion today. If we didn't get to your question, we will be addressing all of the submitted questions afterward via email. If you do have questions that you'd like to continue to send to us, please feel free to do so. And once again, a recording of today's program, as well as a PDF copy of the slide presentations, is going to be available on our website, walkinginfo.org/webinars, and a link to that page is going to be emailed to you within a day. So from there, you'll be able to access those PDFs, and then in about a week, we should have the recording posted on our website. Finally, I want to remind you all that a very brief survey is going to appear once the webinar has ended. We would really appreciate you taking a moment to complete it and let us know what you thought of our presentation. And thank you again to our speakers, Charlie Zegeer, Sheila Lyons, Gary Sokolow, Jack Ecklund, and thanks to each of you for attending today's pedestrian focus